Let's talk all about AI in business. It's hosted by Brent Muller. Welcome to the Future Proof Podcast.
Hi, and welcome to Future Proofed, the podcast where we decode how leaders, execs, founders, they're working smarter by using AI, automation, and just cutting edge technology. If you're looking to future proof your business, you're definitely in the right place. And before we dive in, everybody asks what we do. If you're a founder, leader, C-suite exec who's feeling the pressure to grow faster with leaner teams, we're constantly developing new AI solutions, to help B2B companies. So last week alone, we helped a client save over 30 hours just with their sales team, just some inefficiency they were doing. If you just want to have a quick conversation about how AI can save you some time or help in your business, we do free, no pitch, 30-minute collab sessions. Just check out the links in the show notes. But let's get to today's guest. And today's guest is Bryan Ritchie from he's got a great background when we get into this, but Bryan from GrowthSport and for ICanKnow, right? Two of many companies that he has had his hands in. So Bryan, thank you for joining us and spending time with us.
Yeah, thank you. You're welcome. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So let's jump in first. Bryan, how'd you get here?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So mine's a convoluted and twisted story, but I started in the computer industry back in the 90s. A lot of companies that people probably don't know about or haven't heard about, but was with was with US Robotics, bought by 3Com. Also worked with Novell and Century Software, also with Dana Communications, a number of these early computer companies. I left to start my own company twice, once very successfully, once not so successfully. I think I learned a lot more from the failure than I did from the success. But
isn't that always the case, by the way?
It's always the case, yeah. I took a buyout from a company later. I'd gotten an MBA earlier, went back and got a PhD in economics and really focused on entrepreneurship and innovation. I had a chance to then work with 3 different universities, Michigan State, University of Utah, and the University of Notre Dame, to do all of their commercialization. And in that process, got to start 450 companies. We built 2 venture funds.
And just a few little
that we applied. Yeah, just a few companies. And then I kind of semi-retired from the university and took on these 2 companies that I'm CEOing right now. And GrowthSport has really a combination of a lot of consulting over a lot of years with big companies that we put into a tool. And then ICanKnow is a new technology that's come out of the University of Utah that is next generation lie detection using AI technology.
So let's dive in one at a time because both to me are fascinating. I mean, going through your whole LinkedIn, I probably could ask you a zillion questions, but let's focus on these 2. So let's start with GrowthSport because we have a lot of B2B companies that come on the podcast, and talk to them about the tool you built and why you built it.
Yeah. So what I found is after I had finished my PhD, I'd have a lot of companies that would ask me to help them just from a consulting standpoint around strategy. And what I would see is that companies would build their strategy, we'd go through this offsite, and then they'd come back and they'd be like, hey, we need help doing our strategy again. I'm like, well, what happened to last year's strategy? And what you come to find out is that there's a disconnect between the creation of the strategy and the implementation or the execution of that strategy on the ground. So the whole effort here was to help companies both create the strategic intent, but then connect that alignment with engagement and accountability on a day-to-day execution basis. And we created a tool around that, which is very compelling, which keeps all of these big objectives in front of them, but also creates we gamified it. We made it GrowthSport is kind of a sport methodology where we do what we call a weekly game review around accountability, where everybody in the organization transparently identifies what it is they should be doing and how to do it in order to move those goals forward. So we then were able to work with Marriott and Kroger, Verizon, Ericsson, a number of large companies, a number of mid-sized small companies as well. It applies across the board, but just to help with the methodology to make sure that people could execute against their highest priorities.
Yeah, it's so funny over the years, right? I have a management consulting background as well, and we used to do strategy on a page, and you're right, because tying it to the initiatives and then tracking the implementation and the execution was always the failure point.
Yeah.
Right. And so it sounds like what GrowthSport does is it does it on a weekly basis, tie those things back to that strategy. Am I hearing that right?
Correct. And the really powerful part of that, and you just nailed it, Brent, is that you can sit down and write out a strategy on a piece of paper. But the truth is that strategy is a living, breathing thing. It's constantly changing and iterating. Like if you think about IKEA and its strategy, for example, did it start on day one with flat box shipping? No. That
No.
came as they realized that that would be a strategic advantage, and then they had to implement it. What you really want is a feedback loop where what you do day to day informs the strategy, and the strategy informs what you do day by day, and you create a virtuous cycle. If you can create that, then you create an innovative organization, and that innovation is what keeps you competitive and differentiated.
Couldn't agree more. And it's so funny that you said feedback loop, Bryan, because what the whole key to me of where we're going now, right? I don't care if you're talking about, one of my companies is a data company, right? And we talk about it, and you can't improve data without a feedback loop, right?
Correct.
If you're running an ad campaign, you can't improve it if you're not feeding back what's working and what's not, who's converting, who's not, right?
That's
But when
right.
you go to a company strategy, right, that is more important than ever. So I'm thinking that this is where AI can really help tie that stuff together, because that feedback loop is what's been broken for years.
Correct. And I love that you said AI, because one of the real challenges as humans is to actually recognize what it is that's positive and what's negative. I mean, understanding the outcomes of the different inputs is really hard, but AI does it very well. So if you can go through and figure out exactly what's working, what's not working, and feed the right components back to the strategy, you then accelerate the entire process.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think that this is what you just hit on is so sorely missing from so many companies. And so before we jump into ICanKnow, Bryan, tell me about some of the feedback that you've gotten pre and post implementing GrowthSport's methodology and tooling and tracking.
Yeah, I love that. So, at the top level, what we see almost immediately is there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that people just aren't paying attention to because they're caught up in the whirlwind. And when you really focus on the key objectives and then tie specific behaviors, we call them key performance activities, to those goals, you start to get real movement against those goals that in the past were very difficult to have happen. So you'll get 15 to 20% improvements almost immediately at the top line. But even more than that, this turns out not to just be a management tool. It turns out to be a leadership tool in the sense that as a leader, if I help people understand how they need to be engaged to help move the needle in the organization, and accountability can be really high, then I start keeping my superstars. I start really generating and developing talents and abilities that I didn't know I had. And the whole organization starts to get on a trajectory that is very different than what it was on before. So I'll give you one example. We worked with Verizon. They had been trying to get a mean time to repair number for, I think they'd been working on it for 15 years. I mean, it had been very elusive for them. And once they got the process in place to where they could really get all of their teams focused and everyone understood transparently what everyone else was doing, they hit the number in 9 months. So you can, it's really transformative when you get everybody rowing in the same direction. We like to call three things really. It's alignment, it's engagement, it's accountability. If you can get all those things, it actually changes your culture. It changes the very DNA of the organization.
And I would imagine when you talk about alignment and engagement, right, the first two is how you break silos, because every company I've ever been to as a consultant, the biggest bottlenecks are the siloed nature, and it becomes a communication gap. It becomes actually all kinds of gaps if you start to talk about communication, but also knowledge sharing and
totally.
Interoperability.
Yeah, that knowledge sharing is huge. We have something we call, the last part of sport. Sport is an acronym, and so GrowthSport. And so you've got strategic alignment, the personal performance, operational execution, results accountability. And the last one, team strength, is really about sharing best practices across teams and within teams. And again, that's a cultural trait. It's like a willingness to engage to make everybody better, right? That continuous improvement. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a super important point.
Yeah, and I feel like that what you're talking about is, I'm just thinking about all of my clients over the years. Not a single one of them had a tool like that could help them stay on the accountability train of what they first set out to do, right?
Yep.
And from the board presentation all the way down to the executive council putting the strategy in execution. But every level down, something gets lost in translation because they're not rowing in the same direction.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. In fact, if any of your listeners are interested, they can just go to gsport.app and they can use it for free to get started. It's a very interesting implementation. It's really easy and quick, but they can kind of see the power of getting those things transparently aligned within their org.
Absolutely. If you're listening to this and you're a leader, you definitely need to go try that app, because again, my personal experience of this is a absolutely sorely needed thing from a tool from a leadership standpoint. So Bryan, thank you for sharing. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to share.
Yeah. All right. So listen, we might have to jump back to this, but I don't want to not touch on ICanKnow. So talk to us about ICanKnow. The symbol is on your microphone for everybody seeing it. It's really cool.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I try to make it a habit not to run two companies at the same time. That's not,
it's not easy.
That's not a peaceful, easy kind of thing to do. But in this case, we had a technology that came out of the University of Utah from two scientists that had really were world leaders in digital polygraph. And if you know anything about polygraph, it's a technology that's been around for 100 years. It's okay. It's 65 to 75% accurate depending on who runs the test. But in a great example of how AI is going to change the world, these two came up with an algorithm of how you could monitor somebody's eyes and their face to tell whether they were telling the truth. And here's the science behind it. When we lie, it takes more cognitive load than it does to tell the truth. It just takes more cycles. I just have to think about it harder when I'm lying than when I'm telling the truth. And by the way, it doesn't matter whether I'm a narcissist or whether I'm a good liar or whatever. It just, I have to keep my story straight. I have to think about it more.
Right.
Well, this causes an autonomic response to your eyes, especially your pupils, but also your blink rate and other things like that. So there's a whole algorithm that goes with that then using AI and machine language, what we can do, or machine learning, we can send this to the cloud and do a consistent test. So right now in a polygraph, a human does the evaluation. You get strapped up, it takes your heart rate and your respiration and perspiration and those kinds of things. Turns out all of those things you can control those things as an individual. Well, you can't control your pupil response to your cognitive load. You can't. That's an autonomic response you can't control. And so we don't hook anybody up. You can actually use your phone. In fact, I've got one. You can actually turn your phone upside down and we take 5,000 pictures of your eyes while you're answering questions. All of that is uploaded to the cloud and then it's scored. It takes about 15 to 20 minutes to take a test, about 15 to 20 minutes to score a test. And then that's in your account ready to go. And you can get a test on whatever you need.
All right, Bryan. So why didn't I have this when I had teenage kids?
Exactly. And exactly right. Yeah. In fact, we do have some times where parents will test their kids. That's definitely happened for sure.
Oh, that's fantastic. I was just thinking about some of the things I went through, and I'm like, every parent out there is thinking, how many times did my teenager lie to me? So, it's great. But I could see from law enforcement through government stuff, that's amazing technology.
Yeah.
Is that who you typically sell to, or tell us who the audience is?
Yeah. So we have at our website, if you go to ICanKnow.com, that's EYE, can know. You can actually build a test yourself for any number of different things. We have, drug abuse, alcohol, gambling, fidelity, pornography, theft. I don't know if I said theft, but you can build, and then you can customize a test to whatever you want. Sometimes people are like, they do a test on, did I commit fraud in my business or whatever the case might be. You can build whatever you'd like in a test. We do sell a lot of this to parole organizations, law enforcement organizations about, investigations, attorneys. All of those people are using the technology to determine baseline truth on things they're working on.
That's amazing. So what's the what you said, 65 to 70% from the old one. Is this close to 100?
It's 88 to 90% in a perfect environment, but even on a phone in a non-perfect environment, we're getting 85% accuracies. So you're getting 20 points higher than a polygraph. Again, nothing is perfect, but we continue to improve the technology, and AI is helping us get better and better at this. And again, because we've removed the human and the bias of the human, it makes it consistent and much more accurate.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And so obviously you're wearing the two hats, but for ICanKnow, is the growth strategy mostly for the agencies and from municipal all the way up through federal?
That's a great question. Our go-to-market strategy really is to let the B to G in terms of law enforcement, government, kind of lag behind. And what we're finding is that the fastest conversion is with the B to C market. And because we have a customizable test, we get people who come to our website and they'll just build their own tests. They can pay for them without much interaction from us, which is great from our perspective as well. But then we also have a B to B to C motion where we found that especially private investigators and legal investigators are very interested in the technology. So we sell to them, who then sell to the test taker who's taking the test. And then what's happening is that that's bleeding over into law enforcement, parole, and government. And then they're coming to us through the marketing that we're doing in those other spaces.
Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, so tell me about, for both of these companies, tell me about how emerging tech, such as AI, right? But there's automation, there's RPA, there's all kinds of emerging tech that is just disrupting everything right now. So what are you seeing, Bryan? And then how are you navigating it with both of these different companies?
Wow, that's a fascinating question, Brendan, a big one, because I've already lived through some tectonic shifts. If you think about the PC movement initially, and then the web, and then the cloud, and and now to AI, this is going to dwarf all of those earlier transformations. I mean,
and why do you think that? Right, because I agree with you. Yeah, but
we are so quickly using this technology in every aspect of the business. We're using it in our marketing. It helps us write our blogs. It helps us do our podcasts. It helps us figure out what's working or not in our marketing, our go-to-market strategy. All of this, we're already using AI. We use it in our product, right? In the way that we build our questions, the way that we interact with our customers. If you think about what this is going to do in the future, this isn't going to, it's not that there won't be, I've heard people say, well, there'll be no more radiologists. There'll be no more, fill in the blank. Well, it turns out there will be, though, just going to be those people who know how to use the new technology. Better. In new ways, better and in new ways, right? So there's literally almost no aspect of our business that's not being impacted by this technology. I'll go back to GrowthSport. You mentioned early, and I think it's exactly right on in our pre-conversation before we jumped onto the podcast, that understanding what works inside a company, where the impact is happening or not, is so hard for humans to determine. It's pretty easy for AI to determine. And so, if we ask the right questions, this is one of the things that we've got to figure out is how do we get the right prompts and the right questions, then it gets better and better over time. But it's going to continually ramp up and get more and more powerful. And if you're not using it, it's just going to pass you by completely.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've heard a bunch of people talk about the red team, blue team concept, right? Whereas one of the things that we're a lot of people are not thinking about, right? So there's kind of the 4 evolution that I've heard about AI, right? Which is, the models, right? Which is kind of where ChatGPT started. The second piece is the systems, where we can actually systematize it and you build AI into your workflows and your systems. The third one is you build it into your product, right? And it's everyone's trying to put a feature and use AI on the marketing front. But when you truly put that into your product, that's a different thing. But the fourth one is basically the business of AI, where if you reimagined your business, right, you had to start it from scratch with all the AI assets you have now, would you do it completely different? Right. And that's the red team model, right? Where you say, hey, if I put 5, young people in and said, hey, look at this business, what would you build? It probably wouldn't be what most companies have right now. Right. And that's the part to me that if you're a leader right now, you need to be thinking about that. What is your take on that? Because that was something that really has been brought to me over the last few weeks that is making me rethink a lot of my take personally. But that's why I wanted to get your take, Bryan, because you have your hands in a lot.
I'll give you a great example. Right now we made a decision in ICanKnow as to whether we built out our marketing team or whether we used an agency. And at first thought we're like, well, let's just go ahead and use an agency. But AI now is bringing us to the point where it probably makes sense not to use the agency, but to bring in someone who knows how to use the AI specifically around asking the questions we would ask the agency. So that completely changes the way we think about building the business and the way that the business would actually operate, right? right? So we wouldn't build a traditional marketing team, nor would we let someone else build a traditional marketing team, but rather we'd bring in a completely different structure.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's the kind of thinking that I think if you're listening to this and you're a leader, which again, almost everybody that in our audience is, this is what you have to be thinking about is exactly what Bryan just said. It's a different way of thinking, right?
Yeah.
And you can't trust the third party without possibly vetting them thoroughly about, are they an AI first solution? And then, by the way, do you need everything they're doing, or do you need to your point, can you use AI to better inform you of who the right person, because it will stop you from making a lot of mistakes, especially if you're thinking about hiring an agency. That the bad that comes with that a lot of points where the agencies they have certain specialties and they don't always
and their own set of interests,
growth, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah, for sure.
So, Bryan, listen, I want to circle back to both of your companies. And as you look forward, and I don't think just because of how fast things are changing today, I don't want to look past like a year, 18 months max, because I just, God only knows what the capabilities will be then. But talk to me about what you see over the next year for both of these companies and how you plan on growing them.
Well, we have felt, I'll start with ICanKnow. We have felt the pressure tremendously to iterate on the AI capabilities in the product. And to your earlier point, that's not just having a button that someone can click on and get a little AI help or a little AI.
Right.
This is
a
like
little fraction.
This is like the engine driving the product, right? Like what I really want is I want the customer to be able to interact with the product as if they were interacting with a human and build what they need directly. So this is putting tremendous pressure on us to get ahead of that curve. And it is a fast, this is the other thing that I'm sure your customers understand, which is, and the listeners, is that each one of these transformations gets faster. Right? Like you had to get on board pretty quick to get to the cloud, but you had some time, right?
You had some time.
And PCs, you had even way more time. Right now, it's contracted so much. So we're feeling that pressure. I think in the next 18 months, if you don't have deep integration into AI into your product and into your systems in your company, you're gonna find that you're out of business. You're just not you're just not competitive at all.
Yeah. And so many people, Bryan, don't believe that. And I again, it's not to be scary, but to your point, like you have to be AI first.
Yeah,
right.
I totally agree. And with GrowthSport, we're looking at this, and this is interesting because this has traditionally been a consulting business. Now we have a product that goes with it. But I think the human consulting side of this is also going to rapidly be discontinued in the sense of, not that you won't have humans involved, but you're going to have to be able to figure out how to get all of that information in a usable form for another company to implement quickly. And that's going to be a different business. I think there's going to be a lot of consultants that find themselves out of work because they don't keep up on this.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's one of the reasons I pivoted myself, because I saw it that capability. I could see when you start to have AI be able to reason, it's going to be able to do everything a BCG or a McKinsey consultant can do, right?
Totally. And faster.
And better. And that's what's crazy. And better and faster, right? There won't be these big, long presentations and 6 months of data gathering, right? That stuff's going to happen like that.
Totally.
Yeah.
In fact, they'll probably come back with a list of things. Do these 6 things. It's not going to be like 20. The death by PowerPoint is going to end.
Yes. Which I think a lot of us are okay with that.
Yeah, right.
I know I am.
I'm too. Very happy.
All right, Bryan. So, as you look out, right, this last question, as you look out, what do you see on the business landscape in general, knowing that you have been involved in so many startups and so many, what do you see landscape-wise changing? Because one of the things that I've heard is that the whole venture capital model is now being flipped on its head because you can create an MVP product within a week, not a year. Right. Yeah. So now you can come to a VC with an MVP and not come to a VC saying, I need funding to create the MVP. Right. Yeah. So, and that's just one little smidge of what I'm talking about. But what do you see as the landscape changing in the next year, 18 months?
It's a great question. I think it's harder and harder to be a mid-sized company. you've got these behemoths that are really dominating the technology side because it's just the amount of computing power and energy in general it takes to run AI. You're getting a consolidation at the top, right? So all these big companies of Google and Amazon and all these people, ChatGPT, even Microsoft, that are running our AI systems, there's going to be a return to that scale for sure. Yeah. On the other hand, just as you said, the ability to crank out new products and new ideas and get the first part of that process moving it's unlike it has ever been before. It's easier now to do that than it's ever been. The real challenge, frankly, Brent, is once you've got something, how do you scale it? How do you get past that to at least mid-size, if not large size, without getting crushed by the big boys or not scaling appropriately or quickly enough? I think that's the real challenge going forward.
I agree. And it's going to be interesting to watch how the mid-market survives this, because I think it's going to be I don't know if it's the have and the have-nots. It's the adopters and the non-adopters. The adopters of AI that go, I think that they will become either targets or they'll become market share stealers of the big guys. Mm-hmm. But I do think also that the startups are going to be right on their tails. But the non-adopters, I feel like what you said earlier, where they're going to be out of business.
Yeah, you're just going to get left behind.
It's scary.
Yeah, this is not a fad. This is the automobile. This is if you're a buggy whip manufacturer, you got to figure out how to make the transformation.
Yes, that's a perfect analogy. Perfect analogy. I love that you said that. All right, my last question I always ask all my guests. Bryan, you have more on your plate than most with being CEO of 2 companies, but tell me what you use AI personally to make yourself more productive that you think other founders and CEOs would find useful.
AI does all of my first draft writing now, for sure. So that's a simple one. That's a quick one. But we're also doing all of my presentations. I have AI do all of my first draft presentations, all of my graphics, all of my
Do you do it through ChatGPT, or do you do you use a tool that you think people would like?
I actually do it through all the big, and we'll use all 3 of these. We do Gemini, we do Chat, we do
Grok,
Copilot, Claude. We do Claude. We use all of those. And it's look, companies are implementing and integrating this as quickly as I can start to do this as well, which is great. And happy to use that there as well. But we're really pushing now, again, as I mentioned, into these product areas and into these insights, especially the data insights, to come back and help us understand how we can build value.
Yeah. I've been using, just to piggyback on what Bryan said, is personally I've been using ChatGPT and I play with the different models just like you do to create my presentation or one pagers, and then I throw it in Napkin, and Napkin's a really cool
interesting
tool. So just give it a try, right? You can try it for free. That's what I like about a bunch of these things. You can try it for free, but it'll export PowerPoints right for you, and you're like, oh, this is fantastic.
Yeah, I'll have to try that. I appreciate that recommendation. That's awesome.
But anything else that that you do? Because we'll send you stuff. But we pull these tips out and send them out to everybody, and I just feel like we can't get enough of these knowledge sharing.
Yeah, totally agree. I know I appreciate this opportunity to participate on this, and I'm glad there are people out like you out there helping other companies think through these processes and how to do it. That's incredible.
Well, listen, I'm going to go play with your GrowthSport app because I freaking love this. To me, this is what is needed to accelerate. I watch people do strategy, and I feel like that they're playing a game that's 20 years old. Yeah. And they need to have that accountability because you got to implement faster. Like the cycles have to be faster.
Totally agree.
One last question on that. Do you find that the implementation of these strategies are getting faster? Do you feel like, the people that use GrowthSport, do they kind of adopt a mini agile type framework of iterate and refine?
Yes, this is a brilliant question. What we're finding is that if you're not in that virtuous cycle of strategy change, because it used to be a waterfall process, right? Oh, every year, let's come up with a new strategy. Strategy should be something that's getting tweaked every week, every day, every month. This is the point is that as you get feedback and recognize it needs to be changing real time, what it is you're doing. I just saw something the other day, a statistic about the length of companies. And, 100 years ago, there was some percentage of companies, I'm not going to get this exact, but it was a large number of companies that would exist beyond 20 or 30 years. That's been compressing dramatically over time because these cycles are so fast that you can get right. You'll move right out of your industrial segment if you're not moving quickly to keep up with things. And the market just passes you by. So
I think that's going to be difficult for a bunch of CEOs that's not their mindset. And I think that's going to be, I'm hoping that's a wake up call for everybody listening to this. What Bryan just said, I think is one of the keys to navigating this new way over the next 2 years, for sure.
Yeah.
2 to 3 years.
To integrate that approach. Totally agree. 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing your insights today, Bryan. I honestly, you've been a delight. You shared incredible, to me, strategy opportunities for our audience. And I think there's going to be hopefully a bunch of people that take advantage of your app and talk to GrowthSport.
Thanks for having me. It was great to be here, Bryan.
Yeah. Well, that wraps up this episode of Future Proof. As we always say, future proof what matters in your business. Focus on that and automate the rest. Thank you, Bryan. And we will see you all on the next episode.
If you're ready to embrace change and lead with innovation, be sure to subscribe and never miss an episode. Thanks for tuning in to the Future Proof Podcast.